On this Wednesday night, a final salute to the fallen. 6 Canadian Armed Forces members who died in a helicopter crash honored in an extraordinary ceremony. Canada's worst COVID-19 hotspot, why the virus keeps spreading in Montreal, as another province is on the road to reopening. Contact tracing. There's an app for that.
We're breaking chains of transmission through the contact tracing.
Alberta's new weapon in the war against COVID-19, but is it effective? And celebrating a first.
Bravo!
Little Archie's big milestone.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with a solemn ceremony to honor the 6 members of the Canadian Forces who died in a helicopter crash off the coast of Greece. Only one body has been found, and so there was only one casket carried off the aircraft at this repatriation ceremony in Trenton, Ontario, that of 23-year-old Sub-Lieutenant Abigail Cobra. The others were honored in a simple and moving act. Just their hats carried on black pillows to a lineup of waiting hearses, where family and friends paid their respects. Reminders of the pandemic on the faces of everyone there, including the Prime Minister. 4 air crew and 2 sailors died when their Cyclone helicopter crashed while on a NATO training mission 1 week ago. Ross Lord reports on how the dead were honored when most of their remains are lost at sea.
After what historians call the worst helicopter crash in Canadian military history comes a repatriation ceremony unlike any other. The body of one crash victim, Sub-Lieutenant Abigail Cobra, has been brought back from the Mediterranean Sea to be returned to her family. But military leaders, along with the Prime Minister, had to honor the other 5 victims differently. With their remains still at sea, pillows with the members' service headdress on top are carried from a military plane to waiting hearses. Those members are Captain Brendan Ian MacDonald, a pilot from New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, who has 2 siblings in the armed forces. Captain Kevin Hagan, also a pilot from Nanaimo, British Columbia, remembered for his positivity and his passion for flying and adventure. Captain Maxime Mirand-Morin, an air combat systems officer from Trois-Rivières, Quebec, who, along with 3 other victims, graduated from the Royal Military College of Canada. Sub-Lieutenant Matthew Pike, a naval warfare officer from Truro, Nova Scotia, who was engaged to be married. And Master Corporal Matthew Cousins, an airborne electronic sensor operator from Guelph, Ontario, who served in the Army Reserves for several years before joining the Air Force. As their families grieve, the victims' presence is felt far beyond Canadian Forces-based Trenton, including in Nova Scotia, where the Cyclone helicopter and its ship, HMCS Fredericton, are based.
There's going to be 5 families up there that are not going to receive the remains of their last loved one, and that's gut-ripping. It really is.
Jerry White is a family friend of Sub-Lieutenant Cobra. He and other veterans spoke to her father before the ceremony.
I said I do my best work at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he texted me back immediately. He said, I'm glad to hear that, because that's when everything is quiet and the tears flow best.
Families also met privately with the Prime Minister. After the ceremony, a motorcade traveled down the Highway of Heroes to Toronto, where the coroner's office will conduct an autopsy on Abigail Cobra's remains. Even in times of physical distancing, some scenes of tribute remain the same. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
A Nova Scotia intersection was shut down today as part of the investigation into last month's mass shooting there. RCMP officers spent several hours using a drone to capture aerial images of the spot where Constable Heidi Stevenson died. She was one of 22 people killed during the nearly 14-hour shooting rampage in Nova Scotia. It ended when an officer fatally shot the 51-year-old gunman at a gas station. Now to what continues to be the big story of the day and the year, the pandemic. Quebec has been hardest hit in Canada. There are now more than 34,000 confirmed cases in that province. That represents more than half the confirmed cases in the whole country. Quebec has also had the most deaths, more than 2,500 lives lost, and roughly half the people who have become infected in Quebec are in Montreal. It's also in Montreal where more than 1,500 people have died. So what is it about that city and the response that's led to this? Mike Armstrong is looking into that tonight.
This is the hottest spot for COVID-19 in Canada's hardest hit city. The rate of infection in the borough of Montreal North is about 50% higher than the next two closest hotspots. It is a densely populated, multi-ethnic area, and community groups want to know if those are factors. They're calling on the province to release data that breaks down who's been infected.
We call it social determinants of health. Factors such as race, income level, eventually even the family status.
Now, there are no hospitals in the area, so they've set up a temporary testing facility. What there are a lot of are healthcare workers, nurses, auxiliary nurses, and orderlies. One theory is that those occupations are a factor.
Probably we have healthcare workers and other essential workers that have contracted the virus and that have brought the virus in their families.
L'enjeu est dans la région métropolitaine.
Since the beginning, the province has called Montreal the big challenge. Things are basically under control everywhere else. Businesses have started reopening in other regions. Daycares and elementary schools reopen next Monday. In the Montreal region, everything will be later. 2 weeks for businesses, 1 week for schools, although that could move even further. But despite still struggling to flatten the curve, Quebec is pushing ahead as the only province or state in North America to bring kids back to the classroom. Well, one mistake Quebec is admitting it made is in long-term care facilities. In April, when other provinces were banning staff from working in multiple seniors' homes, Quebec health officials allowed it to continue.
They will wear masks and so they will not contaminate.
The province now says it wants staff to stay in one facility and not move around.
We're implementing this everywhere, and we want the organizations to follow this principle very strictly.
Now, testing is still a massive issue. The province has been doing about 7,000 tests a day. It's pledging to get that up to 14,000 by Friday. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
More testing is key, and by this time tomorrow, Canada will likely have carried out its 1 millionth test for COVID-19. More than 970,000 people have been tested so far. The Chief Public Health Officer of Canada, Dr. Theresa Tam, says she would like 60,000 tests done every day. Right now, we're at less than half that, about 25,000 tests a day. That's why we don't have a full understanding of how many people have been infected. What we do know is the majority of tests do come back negative. Across Canada, about 63,000 people have now tested positive for COVID-19. More than 4,300 people have died. Almost all the new infections and new deaths are in Ontario and Quebec. Most other provinces and territories are reporting single-digit increases now or no new cases at all. Saskatchewan had 25 new cases today. There were 70 in Alberta and 23 positive cases reported in British Columbia today. And in BC, cases of COVID-19 have been on a downward trend for a while now. Today, Premier John Horgan announced plans to start lifting some restrictions. Global BC's Richard Zussman is in Victoria. Richard, what is the restart strategy in BC?
Donna, the big part of the restart strategy is a term being dubbed as doubling your bubble. So people will be able to expand their social circles by the May long weekend, but not too much. And every individual will be different. They need to assess whether they can expose their loved ones potentially to getting COVID-19. There also will be a concerted effort to start opening up more businesses, including a target to have restaurants open by the middle of May. It's a slow approach. Premier John Horgan says things like concerts and big events will not happen in British Columbia until there is a vaccine, and the priority will be around ensuring people have these expanded social circles.
As we start to relax some of the social restrictions, small social gatherings with physical distancing will be allowed. The choices you make about expanding your social circle will depend on your age, your occupation, and the health of the people that you live with.
A big part to all of this as well, Donna, is a slow, gradual reopening of the schools. K-12 will be reopening, but only on a voluntary basis. And there will be a number of new measures in place for schools across British Columbia, including health checks that will be conducted every day. People will not have to get their temperature taken, but they will be asked every day if they're feeling okay. There could potentially be phased classes, and also there will be enhanced cleaning in classrooms.
All right, Richard Zussman in Victoria, thank you. Well, 3 key things must be in place to safely reopen the economy. Enough testing to find positive cases, contact tracing to identify anyone they came in contact with, and a place for those people to isolate. Test, trace, isolate is the mantra, and governments everywhere are figuring out how best to do it. Because even when the curve is flattened, the virus is still out there. Smartphone apps are one way to contact trace. Alberta is using one, but as Heather Yourex-West explains, it's far from perfect.
The people in this room are doing some of the most important work in the fight against COVID-19. They are contact tracers, and their job is to find people who may have been exposed.
So we're breaking chains of transmission through the contact tracing and also identifying, as I said, potential sources that there might be a cluster happening that we need to identify.
Without proper contact tracing, a small outbreak can quickly get out of hand. But the work is tedious and imperfect, relying on people to remember everywhere they went and everyone they saw, going back 2 weeks or more.
If you ask them what they did 1 day ago, 4 days ago, 5 days ago, it takes a while for that recall.
It's why provinces are looking at supplementing their contact tracing work with new technology. Alberta was the first to launch its own smartphone app. AB Trace Together uses Bluetooth to build a record of other app-enabled phones that have been nearby, within 2 meters for at least 15 minutes. Those records are kept on the phone for 21 days. If a user tests positive for COVID-19, they can consent to upload those records to assist public health contact tracers who can then call anyone who may have been exposed. But in order for the app to work on iPhones, users must make sure the app is open and the phone is unlocked every time they go out. And while more than 100,000 Albertans have downloaded the app, more than 2 million need to use it in order for it to work.
The University of Oxford study details it pretty well. We need 50 to 60% adoption rate in order for these apps to be effective.
Morgan Chan's team has developed a different kind of app, one that uses GPS. Whether to adopt an app and which one is a decision each province and territory will have to make. But there's a growing call for a national strategy as well.
Because if people use all different kind of tools, then it'll be more difficult. And some contacts, of course, may go in between provinces. So I think that's an important area of discussion.
With little time to waste as Canada works towards a new normal under the still present threat of COVID-19. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Alberta's energy regulator has suspended more than a dozen environmental rules at various oil sands projects after 4 major oil companies asked for relief during the COVID-19 pandemic. The decision affects the operations of Imperial Oil, Suncor, Syncrude, and Canadian Natural Resources Limited. They no longer need to do things such as test ground and surface water, look for leaking gases, measure toxic pollution from stacks, or monitor wildlife and birds at tailings ponds. The Alberta Energy Regulator says the suspensions are likely to remain in place as long as there are COVID-19 related orders under the Public Health Act. Canada's oil and gas sector has made repeated pleas for aid from the federal government because of COVID-19 and the huge drop in oil prices. Now, 2 of Canada's opposition leaders, the Green Party's Elizabeth May and Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet, are weighing in with some strong opinions.
My heart bleeds for people who believe the sector is going to come back because it's not. Oil is dead. And it's for people in the sector, it's very important that there be just transition funds.
I do agree with Mrs. May about the fact that if oil industry as a whole might not be so dead, I think tar sands are condemned. And putting any more money in that business is a very bad idea.
Weeks ago, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised sector-specific support for the oil and gas industry beyond the $1.7 billion the government has allocated to clean up abandoned well sites. The U.S. president announces changes coming up. The White House coronavirus task force stays in place but shifts its focus. Plus, unprecedented action why New York City's subway system ground to a halt. For the first time in its 115-year history, the entire New York subway system was deliberately shut down overnight. Workers cleaned and disinfected the cars to reduce the risk of spreading COVID-19. The shutdown between 1 and 5 a.m. is going to be a nightly occurrence. Subway use in New York is down 90%, but about 11,000 people still rely on the trains during those overnight hours. The governor of New York says COVID-19 is on the retreat in his state, and he plans to take a cautious approach to reopening the economy. But President Donald Trump is pushing hard to get the whole country back to business, acknowledging that means people will still be at risk of getting sick and dying. And as Jackson Prosco reports, he's making some changes to his coronavirus task force.
This is worse than Pearl Harbor. This is worse than the World Trade Center.
In the fight against COVID-19, the Trump administration has made a stark choice, shifting its focus to reopening of businesses, a move the president admits will all but certainly lead to more deaths.
We have to be warriors. We can't keep our country closed down for years.
On Tuesday, Trump suggested scrapping the White House coronavirus task force with its team of medical experts. Now he's going to retool it to focus on the economy. The panel's previous guidelines for a staged reopening were all but ignored by state after state.
The concern is, going forward, we may see even more dysfunction.
Add to that a new whistleblower complaint from a government doctor who says he tried to raise alarms about the pandemic response and was ignored. It paints a damning picture of the U.S. response.
The administration was very intent on providing good news and in sugarcoating how devastating this virus was going to be.
Dr. Rick Bright claims he warned about shortages of supplies like masks in January, and he pushed back against the use of unproven treatments touted by the president. That ultimately cost him his job.
I was pressured to let politics and cronyism drive decisions.
The details are very concerning. So it wasn't just a difference of opinion, there was a disregard, seemingly, of science.
The science suggests the outbreak is far from under control, with cases growing so fast in dozens of states that they're making up for the declines seen in hard-hit New York. The result is that the U.S. is still recording thousands of deaths every day. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Well, anyway, now what do you want to do?
He's done with that chapter. Ahead, celebrating a royal first. A picture is emerging of the economic damage in the European Union. The EU is forecasting a deep and uneven recession. It says the 27-nation economy has entered the deepest economic recession in its history. It's forecast to contract by a record 7.5% this year, and though growth of about 6% is predicted in 2021, uncertainty is exceptionally high. The euro is expected to drop nearly 8% this year. The worst-hit countries are expected to be Greece, Spain, and Italy, and the European Commission warns without some form of common rescue plan, distortions in how each country copes could threaten the stability of Europe. Germany's top soccer league has been given the green light to restart this month. The Bundesliga will be Europe's first major football league to return to the pitch during the pandemic. There are strict rules in place, though. Players will be regularly tested for COVID-19. They won't all use one locker room, and all games will take place in empty stadiums. The teams are expected to confirm the start date tomorrow. And because we all need a break from the grim news, here's the Duke and Duchess of Sussex with a video of their son Archie to mark his first birthday.
Turn the page. Is that the piece of bread?
His mom, Meghan Markle, is reading one of his favorite books. The video was posted on Instagram as part of a Save the Children fundraising campaign for children and families struggling because of the impact of COVID-19. And it was shot by Harry. You can hear him cheering at the end.
Yeah,
the
end. Woo! Good job.
Bravo! Happy first birthday, Archie. Thank you from the street. Next, a special salute to 9 neighbors. A now familiar ritual has become part of our new reality, the pot banging and clanging every night at 7 p.m. It's the equivalent of a standing ovation for essential workers, especially those who work in hospitals and care homes. One Ottawa street is especially loud because it's home to 9 doctors and nurses, and the whole street is cheering them on. Global News videographer Mike Hazlitt went to listen.
6:58! We got a call from David Chow, who said it would be really cool to cheer his wife on when she came home at shift change. She's an ICU nurse. So we all thought that was a great idea, and we started coming out at 7 to cheer on Kathy.
There was a number of neighbors that came out at 8 o'clock when she got home, and they clapped just for her. And you could see the look on her face, and you could see the smile that came out, and you could see how it's almost like some of the stress had just sort of melted away. We have 4 doctors and we have 5 nurses, just in the very short stretch of street that we're on. And I think it's touched a lot of people.
We started it once a week, and then Dave came up and said, they're doing it in the UK every day at 7 o'clock at shift change, let's do it then.
We come out in the rain, we come out in the snow, we come out in the sun. As a nurse who works in the community, it makes me feel really loved and supported to see my neighbors every night at 7.
Caught me off guard the first time a neighbor thanked me, and I said, for what? And they said, for helping patients. It really is inspirational and motivational, and helps us go in every day.
What we're doing every day out on the front lines is tough, but I think what everybody's doing at home is tough too. Everybody's given up a lot to stay at home.
We're all in this together. I think that's an important theme. I think that's really important for everyone to know is that, you know, we're facing this pandemic and we're facing it together. The look on the face and you know how grateful they were that people were thinking of them, it really touches your heart.
Sure does. And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.